The classroom fell silent as Professor Grack entered. His 6 tentacles moved in perfect harmony, each holding a different teaching aid. The students of Galactic University's diplomatic history class watched as he placed his items on the desk and turned his large, bulbous eyes toward them. "Today," Professor Grack announced, "we begin the most important research project of your academic career." His voice translator gave his words a metallic quality. "You will work in assigned groups to investigate historical mysteries that still affect our modern galactic society." Zexaloria clicked her mandibles nervously. The tall, mantis-like Thracian had spent 3 years studying diplomatic history, but Professor Grack's class was known to be challenging. She looked around at her classmates, a diverse collection of beings from across the Galactic Alliance. "I have assigned your groups," Professor Grack continued, projecting a list onto the classroom's main screen. "Please find your teammates and the topic you will investigate." Zexaloria's heart sank when she saw her assignment. She was grouped with Vool, a gelatinous pluvian with a reputation for laziness, Krillix, a brilliant but arrogant crystalline Sivorian, and Morph, a shape-shifting Altarian who changed appearance based on emotional state. But her disappointment about her teammates quickly gave way to excitement when she read their topic: Why Humans Are Banned from Galactic Warfare. Humans. Vool's translucent body bubbled with interest as he oozed toward Zexaloria. "That's actually interesting." Krillix joined them, his crystalline body reflecting the classroom lights. "Humans are a fascinating case study. Despite being Alliance members for nearly a century, they remain the only species prohibited from joining standardized conflict resolution forces." Morph shifted from blue to yellow, indicating curiosity. "My parent cluster served with humans during the commercial disputes of the Rigel system. They never explained why humans were later banned." The 4 students gathered at a study table as other groups dispersed to begin their research. Professor Grack floated over to them, his tentacles now folded in a gesture of caution. "Your topic is sensitive," he said quietly. "The official records will tell you that humans were banned due to extreme psychological risk factors and incompatible tactical approaches. But these explanations are insufficient for graduate-level research." "Then how should we proceed, Professor?" asked Zexaloria. "Like true historians," he replied. "Find primary sources. The truth exists, but it requires effort to uncover." He gestured toward the library wing. "Begin with the public records, but don't end there." After Professor Grack left, the group accessed the university's database. The official history was frustratingly vague. Humans had joined the Alliance military operations briefly, participated in a few minor conflicts, then were permanently banned, following something called the Proxima Incident. Details were classified. "This is useless." Krillix's crystalline form darkened with frustration. "We need first-hand accounts." Morph, now a thoughtful green color, suggested, "The Earth Embassy maintains a diplomatic office on campus. Perhaps they could help." "Why would humans share information about their own ban?" Vool bubbled skeptically. "Because it's their history too," Zexaloria said, "and they might appreciate someone taking a genuine interest." The next day, the 4 students visited the human diplomatic office. The receptionist, a robotic interface with a holographic human face, directed them to a waiting area filled with Earth artifacts, plants, artwork, and historical images showing humans in various time periods. After a short wait, a door opened and a human female emerged. She was shorter than Zexaloria had expected, with pale skin and reddish-brown hair. "I'm Catherine Winters, Junior Ambassador to the Galactic Council," she said with a friendly smile. "I understand you're doing research on human military history?" Zexaloria stepped forward. "We're investigating why humans were banned from galactic warfare. The official records lack detail." Catherine's smile faded slightly. "That's a complex topic. Much of that information remains classified even to most humans. We don't need military secrets," Krillix said. "Just a clearer understanding than incompatible tactical approaches." Catherine studied them for a moment. "What's your real interest?" In this, Morph shifted to a sincere blue. "Knowledge. Understanding between species. Isn't that what the Alliance stands for? Catherine seemed to make a decision. My grandfather served during the period when humans were permitted in Alliance military operations. He's retired now, living in the lunar colony. If you're serious about this research, he might be willing to speak with you. Your grandfather was there? Zexaloria couldn't believe their luck. Yes. Richard Winters. He was among the first 100 humans integrated into mixed species units. Catherine tapped on her communication device. I'll contact him and arrange a meeting if you're interested. The students agreed enthusiastically. As Catherine made the arrangements, Zexaloria noticed something strange. A small alert light blinking on Catherine's device after she entered her grandfather's name. Is something wrong? Zexaloria asked. Just standard procedure, Catherine said, though her expression suggested otherwise. Certain keywords automatically trigger security protocols. Nothing to worry about. 2 days later, the students boarded a shuttle to Earth's lunar colony. As their ship approached the gray, cratered surface, Morph shifted nervously between colors. I've never met a retired human warrior before, they admitted. They're not so different from other species, Vool said, though his gelatinous form quivered slightly. Just less predictable. The lunar colony was an impressive sight, a series of domed habitats connected by transparent tunnels, overlooking the vast gray plain known as the Sea of Tranquility. Their shuttle docked at the main transport hub where Catherine was waiting to escort them. Grandfather is excited to meet you, she said as they boarded a local transport. He doesn't get many visitors interested in his military service. Their transport took them to a residential section with smaller private habitats. Catherine led them to a modest dome with a spectacular view of both the lunar landscape and the distant Earth. The door opened to reveal an elderly human male. Richard Winters was tall and thin, with white hair and deeply lined face. Despite his obvious age, he stood straight and his eyes were alert and curious. Welcome to my home, he said, gesturing them inside. It's been many years since I've had alien visitors interested in old war stories. The interior was comfortable but simple, decorated with objects from Earth and other worlds. On one wall hung a display of what appeared to be military insignia from various Alliance species. As they settled into the main living area, Zexaloria noticed Richard studying them with intense interest. You're a Thracian, aren't you? He asked her. I served alongside Commander Krizut during the border dispute of Epsilon Eridani. Finest tactical mind I ever encountered. That was nearly 70 years ago, Krillix observed. Richard smiled. A human mind may age, but it rarely forgets the important things. He turned to Catherine. Will you stay? She shook her head. This is your story to tell, grandfather. I'll return for them later. She gave him a gentle hug before departing. After she left, Richard's demeanor changed subtly. He seemed more serious, more focused. So, he said, you want to know why humans are banned from galactic warfare? It wasn't a question. The official explanation is that we're incompatible with Alliance military doctrine. That's true, but incomplete. What's the complete truth? Zexaloria asked. Richard looked out the viewport at the Earth hanging in the black sky. The truth is that we're not banned because we were ineffective. He turned back to face them, his eyes reflecting a memory none of them could see. We're banned because we were too effective, in ways that frightened the entire galactic community. The 4 students leaned forward, completely unaware that their innocent academic project had just triggered automated surveillance alerts in 7 different intelligence agencies across the galaxy. Richard Winters settled back in his chair, his weathered hands resting on his knees. The 4 alien students watched him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I was 27 when Earth joined the Galactic Alliance, Richard began. Young and idealistic, like most humans who volunteered for the first mixed-species military units. Zexaloria noticed how the old man's eyes seemed to look beyond the room, into the past. The Alliance welcomed us with open arms, or tentacles or appendages, Richard continued with a small smile. They needed our resources, our creativity, our perspective. and we were eager to prove ourselves worthy of membership. The records show you were among the first 100 humans integrated into Alliance military operations, Krillix said, his crystalline form glinting in the lunar habitat's light. Yes, I was assigned to the peacekeeping vessel Harmonic Resolution, under the command of Admiral Zur, an Arcturian with 300 years of military experience. Richard paused. We humans thought we understood what we were joining. We didn't. What do you mean? Asked Morph, shifting to a curious yellow-green. Galactic warfare wasn't what we expected. It was orderly, mathematical. Richard searched for words. When species had disputes that couldn't be resolved diplomatically, they engaged in standardized, regulated conflict. Casualties were calculated in advance. Tactical maneuvers followed established patterns. The side with inferior position or resources would concede once certain thresholds were reached. Fool bubbled thoughtfully. That's how civilized species resolve unavoidable conflicts. It minimizes suffering. By human standards, it hardly seemed like warfare at all, Richard said. More like a complex game with ships and weapons instead of pieces on a board. Was that a problem? Zexaloria asked. Not at first. We adapted, followed protocols. But then came our first real deployment. Richard described how the Harmonic Resolution was sent to mediate a border dispute between the Proxians and the Deltans. What should have been a standard operation changed when both sides rejected the alliance's terms and attacked the peacekeeping forces instead. Admiral Zur followed protocol perfectly, Richard explained. Our ship took heavy damage. We were cut off from retreat. The mathematical model showed a 97% probability of defeat. So surrender was the logical choice, said Krillix, preventing unnecessary loss of life. That's what Admiral Zur prepared to do, Richard nodded. But the human contingent, led by Lieutenant Samantha Ellis, saw something the algorithms missed. Richard A. explained how Samantha identified a pattern in the enemy attacks, a vulnerability caused by their adherence to standard tactical models. She requested permission to lead a small team on a counter-offensive. Admiral Zur reluctantly agreed, seeing no harm in allowing the humans one final, futile effort before surrender. What Samantha did next violated every principle of regulated alliance warfare, Richard said, his voice low but intense. She didn't follow the mathematical optimum approach. Instead, she led her team in what we humans call asymmetric warfare. What does that mean? Asked Zexaloria. It means fighting unpredictably, adapting instantly, using the environment, psychology, and improvised weapons, creating confusion and fear, instead of just inflicting calculated damage. Richard described how Samantha's team disabled the enemy's flagship by targeting unexpected systems, used decoy signals to create the illusion of a larger force, and employed psychological tactics that threw the enemy commanders into disarray. The enemy surrendered to us, Richard said, not because our force was superior, it wasn't, but because they couldn't predict what we would do next. The uncertainty was more devastating than any weapon. The alien students sat in silence, processing this information. That doesn't seem so terrible, Morph finally said, their color a confused blue-green. You won against poor odds. Isn't that admirable? The Alliance Military Command didn't think so, Richard replied. They were disturbed by our methods, but they were even more disturbed by how effective those methods were. What happened next? Vul asked. The human approach to combat was labeled an interesting anomaly. We were studied, analyzed. Some commanders wanted us removed from service immediately. Others saw potential value in our unconventional thinking. Richard's expression darkened. Then the Krell arrived and everything changed. The Krell? Zexaloria's mandibles clicked in surprise. They're not in any of our historical records. They wouldn't be, Richard said grimly. The Alliance erased most public information about them after the war. The Krell were a hive mind species from beyond the galactic rim. They didn't come to conquer, they came to harvest. Planets, resources, population, everything. Krillix's crystalline form darkened with skepticism. An entire species erased from historical records, that seems unlikely. Richard stood up slowly and walked to a locked cabinet near his viewport. He pressed his palm against it and the door slid open. From inside, he removed a small metallic object that gleamed with an unnatural purple light. Krell technology, he said, holding it up. A fragment of a neural harvester. My authorization to keep this specimen is one of only 23 granted in the entire Alliance. The students stared at the object. It seemed to pulse slightly, as if still alive. The Krell attacked without warning or communication. Richard continued. The Alliance's standardized combat protocols were useless against them. The Krell didn't follow rules or patterns. They didn't surrender when the mathematics indicated they should. They simply kept coming, planet after planet. What happened? Zexaloria asked, unable to take her eyes off the Krell artifact. The Alliance was losing badly. In desperation, they turned to the humans. The same humans whose combat approach they had found so disturbing. Richard carefully returned the artifact to its cabinet. They asked us to advise their fleet commanders on how to fight an enemy. That didn't follow the rules. And did you help them? Morph asked, now a deep blue of concern. We did more than help, Richard said, returning to his seat. We showed them how to fight the way humans fought for thousands of years on Earth. Not with mathematical precision, but with cunning, deception, and psychological warfare. Did it work against the Krell? Vool asked. Yes, Richard said simply. For the first time, Alliance forces began to win battles. But that victory came at a cost that few had anticipated. He looked at each of the students in turn. The Alliance species were psychologically unprepared for what real warfare entailed. The effect on non-human troops was severe. What do you mean by severe? Krillix asked. Mental trauma, psychological breakdown. Several Medusan officers committed ritual suicide rather than continue fighting using human tactics, saying they preferred death to becoming what they had witnessed in us. Richard's voice grew heavy. That was just the beginning of why humans were eventually banned from galactic warfare. But the true reason, the reason that remains classified even now, came during the final battle at Proxima Centauri. Richard looked up suddenly at a soft beeping sound. That's Catherine. She's returning to take you back to the university. He stood up. If you truly want to understand why humans are banned from galactic warfare, come back tomorrow. I'll tell you about Proxima Centauri and what happened there that changed everything. As the students prepared to leave, Zexaloria noticed Richard glancing toward a hidden sensor in the corner of the room. She realized with sudden clarity that their conversation was being monitored, perhaps had been from the beginning. Until, tomorrow then, Mr. Winters, she said. Richard nodded, his eyes conveying a message his words did not. Until tomorrow. By then I suspect my security clearance review will be complete, and I can tell you what really happened. The truth about why the galaxy fears human warfare so deeply. The next day, the 4 students returned to Richard Winters' lunar habitat. This time, Catherine did not accompany them. A security officer met them at the transport station instead, scanning them thoroughly before escorting them to Richard's home. The monitoring has become more obvious, Krillix whispered as they approached the habitat. Whatever happened at Proxima Centauri must be significant, Zexaloria replied. They found Richard sitting by the large viewport, watching Earth hang in the black sky. He seemed more tired today, his shoulders slightly bent. When he turned to greet them, however, his eyes were clear and focused. I received clearance to share more details with you, he said after they settled in. Your research project has been classified as an official historical documentation effort. Apparently, some in the Alliance government believe it's time for the younger generation to understand what happened. So we can continue our research? Morph asked, their form shifting to a hopeful shade of green. Yes, but everything I tell you will be recorded. Richard gestured to a small device on the table. For accuracy, they say. Vool bubbled nervously. For control, more likely. Richard smiled slightly. You're learning, young Pluvian. He straightened in his chair. Now, where did we leave off? You were going to tell us about the Krell incursion and what happened at Proxima Centauri. Zexaloria reminded him. Richard nodded. The Alliance was losing the war against the Krell. Their standardized military doctrine was ineffective against an enemy that didn't follow the same rules. In desperation, they turned to humans. You mentioned yesterday that humans were asked to advise Alliance commanders, Krillix said. At first, yes, but as the situation worsened, human involvement deepened. Richard's voice took on a more formal tone, as if he was now giving an official account. Commander Alan Pierce was put in charge of a human task force embedded with the main Alliance fleet. I served under him as a tactical officer. Richard explained how Pierce quickly recognized that the Alliance was fighting a war of attrition. It couldn't win. The Krell reproduced faster than they could be defeated, and their hive mind allowed them to adapt quickly to Alliance tactics. Wanatilang, the Krell attacked the Rigelian system. Home to over 30 billion sentient beings, Pierce convinced the Alliance admiral to try a fully human approach. Richard's expression darkened. What followed was the first true implementation of Earth's military doctrine in a galactic-scale conflict. What did you do? Zexaloria asked. We abandoned predictable formations, we set traps. We used deception on a massive scale. We identified vulnerabilities in the Krell fleet and exploited them without mercy. Richard paused. And we won. The Rigelian system was saved, and the Alliance had its first significant victory. That sounds like a triumph, Morph said, now a confused mix of colors. Why would this lead to humans being banned? Because of what came after, Richard replied. During the post-battle analysis, Alliance psychologists reported severe trauma among non-human troops, not from fighting the Krell, but from witnessing and participating in human combat methods. Richard explained that 3 Medusan officers had committed ritual suicide rather than continue fighting in this manner. Many others required extensive psychological treatment. The senior Medusan officer left a message explaining that human tactics were an affront to civilized existence, and that they could not bear to become what humans already were. What did that mean? Vool asked, his gelatinous form rippling with confusion. It meant that humans approach warfare differently at a fundamental level, Richard said. For most Alliance species, warfare had been ritualized over thousands of years, made predictable, mathematical, almost ceremonial. Humans never developed that way. Because of Earth's isolated development, Krillix suggested. Partly, but mostly, because of what drove human warfare. Richard leaned forward. Most species fought over resources, territory, or specific grievances. Humans fought those wars too, but we also fought ideological wars. Conflicts not just over what you have or what you did, but over what you believe and who you are. The 4 students listened intently as Richard explained how human warfare evolved to target not just an enemy's physical capacity to fight, but their psychological willingness to continue fighting. That's why our tactics were so disturbing to Alliance species. Richard continued. We didn't just fight to achieve a specific military objective, we fought to break our enemy's will. But the Krell were threatening the entire galaxy, Zexaloria argued. Surely breaking their will was necessary. The Alliance leadership reluctantly agreed with you, Richard nodded. Despite the psychological costs, human tactics were increasingly adopted as the war progressed. Special mixed units were formed, with humans training alien soldiers in our methods. Richard's voice grew softer. And then came Proxima Centauri, humanity's nearest stellar neighbor, and home to our oldest colony outside the solar system. The habitat's lighting dimmed slightly, as if responding to the gravity of his words. The Krell launched a major offensive toward Earth itself, Richard continued. Their first target was Proxima Centauri B, our colony world. The Alliance fleet, now partially trained in human tactics, engaged the Krell armada in the system's outer reaches. Richard described how he was aboard the Alliance flagship when the battle began. The fight initially followed the hybrid tactics developed under human advisors, but then something changed. We received a transmission from the colony, Richard said, his voice tight with emotion. The Krell had landed harvest units on the surface. Millions of colonists were at risk. What are harvest units? Morph asked, now a deep blue of concern. The Krell didn't just destroy, they consumed, Richard explained. Their harvest units extracted resources, living and non-living, and converted them into raw materials for more Krell. The students sat in horrified silence. The human contingent, led by Major Nicole Hayes, requested permission to launch a rescue operation, Richard continued. The Alliance Admiral denied it. According to all their models, the colony was already lost. Diverting resources would jeopardize the entire defense of the Sol system. Richard's eyes seemed to look inward, seeing events long past. What happened next changed galactic warfare forever. Major Hayes enacted an emergency protocol that Earth governments had secretly built into our integration agreement. In certain extreme circumstances, human officers could temporarily assume command of mixed units. She took control without authorization? Krillix asked, his crystalline form darkening with shock. She had authorization, just not from the Alliance Admiral, Richard clarified. She took command of a strike force and executed what I can only describe as the most terrifying military operation I've ever witnessed. Richard fell silent, staring out at the distant Earth. What did she do? Zexaloria finally asked. Richard turned back to them, his expression grave. She showed the galaxy why humans are different, why we're feared, and why, after Proxima Centauri, we would never again be permitted to participate in galactic warfare. Fa. Security officer entered the room, indicating their time was up for the day. Tomorrow, Richard promised as they were escorted out, I'll tell you what really happened at Proxima and the classified review that led to the ban. Then you'll understand why the Alliance fears human warfare yet keeps us close, just in case the darkness returns. As they left, Zexaloria noticed that 2 more security officers had joined their escort. Whatever they were about to learn, it was clear that the highest levels of Alliance security were now monitoring their research very closely indeed. On their 3rd visit to the lunar habitat, the students noticed significant changes. Security personnel were stationed at every entrance. 2 Alliance officials in formal diplomatic attire waited with Richard. The viewport that usually offered a view of Earth was now opaque. These are Observer Kryn and Supervisor Galtz, Richard introduced the officials. They're here to ensure I don't share anything beyond my clearance level. The tall, slender Observer Kryn nodded stiffly. This historical account has attracted attention at the highest levels of Alliance governance. Proceed with caution. Supervisor Galtz, a stocky being with thick-scaled skin, activated a more sophisticated recording device than the one from yesterday. All statements will be reviewed for accuracy and security implications. Richard waited until the officials moved to the far side of the room before turning to the students. Where did we leave off? Major Hayes took emergency command of a strike force at Proxima Centauri, Zexaloria reminded him. Against the Admiral's orders. Yes. Richard's voice dropped lower. What she did next revealed something about humans that the Alliance had suspected but never fully understood until that moment. Richard described how Nicole Hayes led a strike force of 3 ships toward Proxima Centauri B, while the main battle continued in the outer system. The ships contained a mix of human and alien personnel, though all commanding officers were human. Hayes knew conventional tactics wouldn't work with such limited resources, Richard continued. So she employed what humans call psychological warfare against the Krell hive mind. How can you use psychological tactics against a hive mind? Krillix asked, his crystalline form reflecting confusion. That was precisely what everyone believed impossible, Richard said. The Krell shared consciousness across their collective. They had no individuals to target, no fear to exploit, no morale to break, or so the Alliance thought. Richard revealed that human scientists had been secretly studying the Krell since their first encounters. They discovered that while the Krell shared a collective consciousness, that consciousness had vulnerabilities, patterns of neural activity that could be disrupted. Hayes's force deployed specialized weapons designed specifically to target Krell neural clusters, Richard explained. These weapons didn't just kill Krell, they severed their connection to the hive mind. They created chaos within their perfect order. Observer Kryn cleared his throat loudly from across the room. Richard glanced at him before continuing more carefully. The human-led force used tactics that created confusion and disruption in the Krell coordination. They struck unpredictably, disappeared, then struck again elsewhere. They sent confusing signals and false information into the Krell communication channels. Morph shifted to a deep purple of astonishment. How could humans know how to do this? You'd never encountered the Krell before. Because, Richard said quietly, humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've learned that any mind, even a collective one, can be attacked directly, not just the body that houses it. Richard described how Hayes's force managed to land on the colony and began evacuating civilians. The Krell harvest units, normally perfectly coordinated, became erratic and disorganized when faced with human tactics. The neural disruptors had an unexpected effect, Richard continued. They didn't just sever individual Krell from the hive mind temporarily. They corrupted the information flowing back to the main consciousness. The entire hive began experiencing something no Krell had ever felt before. What was that? Vool asked, his gelatinous form rippling with interest. Fear, Richard said simply. We introduced fear to a species that had never known it. The Alliance officials shifted uncomfortably at this statement, but didn't interrupt. Hayes's team evacuated most of the colonists and dealt the Krell a significant blow. The operation was a military success. Richard's expression darkened. But the Alliance observers were horrified by what they witnessed. What specifically disturbed them? Zexaloria asked. The realization that humans instinctively understood how to wage war on a psychological level, Richard explained. We didn't just target bodies, we targeted minds, even minds utterly alien to our own. Richard revealed that after the battle, Alliance xenopsychologists conducted extensive studies of human military history. They made a disturbing discovery. Earth's military development was unique in focusing on psychological dominance as much as physical victory. Most species developed warfare as an extension of predatory instincts or resource competition, Richard said. Humans developed it as a form of communication, a way to impose will. We don't just fight to defeat, we fight to dominate minds. Supervisor. Galtz approached, handing Richard a data pad. You may share the conclusions of the classified review now. Richard nodded and continued. After Proxima Centauri, the Alliance convened a secret security summit to discuss what they called the human problem. Based on thousands of psychological evaluations and battle records, they reached 3 conclusions. He read from the datapad. First, humans are the only known species that evolved to wage war psychologically as well as physically, making them uniquely effective and uniquely disturbing in combat situations. Second, other species exposed to human combat methods experience severe psychological trauma and, more alarmingly, some begin to adopt these methods, suggesting human approaches to warfare might be contagious. Third, and most concerning, humans show remarkable psychological resilience to the horrors of war through compartmentalization. They can engage in brutal conflict and then return to being peaceful, creative members of society in ways other species find almost impossible. Richard set the pad down. The final report concluded that humans weren't banned because we were ineffective or even because we were too violent. We were banned because we were too effective in ways that threatened the psychological stability of the entire galactic community. What does that mean exactly? Krillix asked. Observer Kryn stepped forward. It means, he said in a formal tone, that humans don't just defeat their enemies. They break them. And they can do this without breaking themselves. The room fell silent as the students processed this information. But if humans were so effective against the Krell, Zexaloria finally asked, why ban them completely? Wouldn't they be valuable in future conflicts? That's the final part of the story, Richard said. Earth's governments accepted the ban as a reasonable compromise for continued participation in the Alliance. But in exchange, the Alliance established the Human Contingency Protocol. What's that? Morph asked, now a deep blue of concern. A classified agreement, Supervisor Galtz answered. In the event of another existential threat like the Krell, human military forces will be activated under special provisions. Richard nodded. The galaxy fears what we can do, but also recognizes that sometimes in the darkest moments they may need us to do it again. Observer Kryn stepped forward. This session is concluded. Return tomorrow for your final briefing, before submitting your research. As the students were escorted out, Zexaloria noticed a new look in Richard's eyes. Not pride or shame, but a deep, weary understanding of humanity's unique and terrible gift. On their final visit to the lunar habitat, the students found it transformed. The security personnel remained, but the atmosphere had changed. The viewport was clear again, showing Earth hanging in the black sky. Catherine Winters had returned, standing beside her grandfather. Several high-ranking Alliance officials were present, including a council representative whose species Zexaloria didn't recognize. Your research project has attracted significant attention, Catherine explained as the students settled in. The council has decided to use it as a controlled introduction of this historical truth to the younger generation. The council representative, a tall being with iridescent skin, stepped forward. For too long we have hidden the full truth about the human band from our educational systems. Recent intelligence suggests another threat similar to the Krell may be emerging in the Outer Rim. The next generation must understand our complex relationship with humanity. Richard Winters looked more relaxed today, as if sharing his story had lifted a weight from him. Today I'll answer any final questions before you complete your research. Zexaloria went first. You mentioned the Human Contingency Protocol yesterday. Has it ever been activated since the Krell War? Twice, Catherine answered. Both incidents remain classified, but I can confirm that human military consultants have been deployed to address emerging threats. The results were effective. Krillix's crystalline form shimmered with a new question. If humans are so dangerous in warfare, why allow them in the Alliance at all? The council representative answered. Humanity brings tremendous benefits to the Alliance: scientific innovation, cultural contributions, philosophical perspectives. Their approach to problem solving is unique and valuable. We simply contain the one aspect of human nature that poses psychological risks to other species. And we agreed to this? Richard smiled wryly. After witnessing the trauma our tactics caused to Allied forces, most human leaders accepted the restriction as reasonable. We don't want to hurt our friends even unintentionally. Morph, shifting through thoughtful colors, asked, what happened to Major Hayes after Proxima Centauri? Catherine and Richard exchanged glances. Catherine nodded, slightly. Nicole Hayes was both celebrated and feared after the battle, Richard said. The Alliance wanted her expertise but was terrified of her methods. Eventually, a compromise was reached. He gestured to Catherine, who continued the story. General Hayes now leads a small, elite multi-species unit at a classified facility in Alliance space. They train for worst-case scenarios, threats that conventional Alliance forces couldn't handle. Their existence isn't officially acknowledged. Vool bubbled with his final question. After learning all this, should we be afraid of humans? The room fell silent. Finally, Richard answered, not of humans as individuals. We're not inherently more violent or aggressive than other species. What you should understand is the psychological capacity humans developed through our isolated evolution. He looked out at Earth. For thousands of years, we were alone on that planet, fighting only each other. We learned to fight minds as well as bodies. That capacity remains within us, even as we've built a peaceful global society. Catherine added, think of it like a tool, one that's dangerous but sometimes necessary. The Alliance doesn't fear humans. It fears what circumstances might require us to become. The council representative moved to the center of the room. Your research will be presented to the university tomorrow as a special lecture. It will mark the beginning of a more transparent approach to this aspect of our shared history. As the official meeting concluded, Richard asked to speak privately with the students one last time. The officials reluctantly agreed, giving them 5 minutes alone. Once they were gone, Richard leaned forward. There's one thing I couldn't say officially, he whispered. The Alliance fears human warfare because they recognize something they don't want to admit. Under enough pressure, their species could develop the same psychological approach to conflict that we did. We're not different in kind, only in development. You mean other species could become like humans in warfare? Zexaloria asked, her mandibles clicking softly. Yes. The real reason for the ban isn't just protecting other species from us, it's protecting them from becoming like us. Richard's eyes were intense. The trauma non-human troops experienced fighting alongside us wasn't just from witnessing our methods. It was from recognizing those methods awakened something in themselves, something they had evolved beyond but that still lurked in their ancient instincts. The security team signaled that time was up. As the students prepared to leave, Catherine approached Zexaloria. My grandfather sees potential in you, she said quietly. After your presentation, I'm authorized to offer you an internship with the Diplomatic Corps. We need more non-humans who truly understand us. The next day, the students presented their research to a stunned university audience. Professor Grack moderated the discussion afterward, handling the many shocked questions with surprising skill. We don't ban humans from galactic warfare because they're dangerous to the enemy, Professor Grack concluded. We ban them because of how dangerous their ideas are to us, and because we recognize that sometimes in the darkest moments, we may need those ideas again. As the students left the presentation hall, they saw things differently than before. The human visitors to the campus no longer seemed like just another species. They moved with a quiet confidence that now held new meaning, the confidence of beings who had faced their own darkness and learned to live with it. Zexaloria found Catherine waiting outside. Have you considered my offer? The human asked. I have questions first, Zexaloria replied. If I join the Diplomatic Corps, will I learn more about the human contingency protocol? About General Hayes and her unit? Catherine smiled slightly. Eventually. There's much more to the story than even my grandfather could tell you. And the threat in the Outer Rim? Is it real? Catherine's smile faded. Very real. The Alliance is already quietly strengthening connections with Earth's military advisors. They won't admit it publicly, but they're afraid. Should I be afraid too? Zexaloria asked. No, Catherine said, looking up at the artificial stars of the university dome. Be hopeful. The same human capacity that makes us dangerous also makes us determined to protect those we consider friends. She extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. We're not just waiting in reserve for the next war, Zexaloria. We're working to ensure it never comes. As Zexaloria reached out her mantis-like appendage to shake Catherine's hand, she realized she was touching the evolutionary descendant of both the Alliance's greatest nightmare and its final hope. I accept the internship, she said. Meanwhile, at a classified facility deep in Alliance space, General Nicole Hayes watched a recording of the student's presentation. Her office was spare and functional, but one wall displayed combat honors from a dozen species. A soft alert sounded on her communication device. General, said her aide, the Council has approved the expansion. We begin recruiting new trainees next month. Hayes nodded, her eyes still on the screen showing the 4 students. Good. We'll need them sooner than the Council thinks. She turned to the star map on her wall, where a small section of the outer rim glowed with a warning indicator. The darkness was coming again. And this time humanity would not wait to be called upon too late.